Good morning, everybody. My name is Jared O'Leary. I've been playing drums since 1998, but I still got a lot of stuff to work on. Now, normally in these practice streams, I would practice, but I woke up with a headache because of... apparently I slept wonky. And because I have a headache, I don't want to drum. So instead, I'm going to answer a bunch of different questions. Now, in the other practice streams that you can find, there's over 360 of them in this particular playlist, there are timestamps in the description that shows what I was practicing, what I was working on, or what I was talking about. So if you're watching this after the fact and not live, there are timestamps in the description of this video so you can jump to a specific topic to see what I was talking about. And I'm going to edit down a lot of these into some responses and put them into this drumming tips playlist. Inside this playlist, there's over a dozen hours of free drumming tips that I have paid a lot of money to learn over the many years that I've been drumming, again since 1998. And a lot of these tips are questions that people ask in the different chats across two different YouTube, both vertical, both horizontal, as well as the Twitch chat and Instagram, etc. So people often ask me these questions because I've been drumming for so long and because I've taught every grade, kindergarten through doctoral student, etc. The mic is weird? Interesting. Well, I don't know why it sounds weird to you. Let me see if it sounds okay here. We'll pull it up on my tube of view on my phone. Do. Yeah, that is weird. Okay, that's why. I don't know why it's doing that. All right, so now it should be muted, so it should fix that. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. So the E8010 is being wonky, apparently. Thank you for pointing that out. That would have been very unfortunate to go through a whole Q&A, and it sounded really weird like that. So what I don't know is why all of a sudden the E8010 is sounding when it's not plugged in. Weird! Well, something else to focus on when doing these streams. Anyways, so not practicing today, but we are going to answer a bunch of different questions, so let's stay tuned for some of that. Now, all of the resources that I'll be demonstrating can be found here, jaredoleary.com/drum. This is where you can find 62 chop exercises organized, as well as over 1,000 grid variations organized. We got triplet ones, we got 16th note ones, we got some weird ones like hurt the grid. We've got a bunch of limb independent stuff, which I was working on yesterday. We've also got 460 plus marching bass stuff, a bunch of different timing exercises to help you out with that. We've got a bunch of different cadences, the full scores, as well as over 360 technique exercises. And then here's all the drumming tips. Here's the live stream recordings. Here's the sticks and pads I use. And then here's some scripted lessons. And then here's some non-sponsored reviews of some of the pads that I am drumming with. Anyways, I've been rambling a bunch. What I'm going to do now is pull up some notes for myself, and these notes will help me to kind of like stay on track. So what I'll be doing is I will respond to any questions that are in the chat if you have some questions, but I've got some notes in here of some things to make sure that I talk about, so I'll kind of like read through them and then expand upon them, so that way I can hopefully help you all out. Okay, let's see. So I watched some WGI clips and like full shows from this year, and Civitas' show this year was deceptively difficult. So it was absurdly musical with constantly changing dynamics. They were just constantly flowing up and down, and it was really interesting to watch. The dynamics were also very unpredictable, and I mean that in a good way. So like some crescendos might be for like 2 counts to get from like a low to a high, and then others might be for 4 counts. And this is very difficult to clean as compared to like a 2-height system, which technically is 3 heights. But with 2 heights, you basically have taps, and you have accents, and then technically you have the grace note, which is a 3rd height, which we're just going to ignore for the moment. But it's so much easier to be able to clean up something where everything that's loud is here and everything that's soft is here, compared to where you've got dynamics constantly changing in between them. For example, if you are playing a roll, how do you clean a roll? So are you going to make it so that it's a step motion with the dynamics? So you're going from like 3, 3, 6, 6, 9, 9, 12, 12? Or are you going to make it so it's like 3, 4, 6, 7, 9, 11, 12, 14, etc. Like, are each one of the notes going to crescendo, or is it going to be stepwise where you have 2, 2, 2, 2? Or are you going to have a dynamic so that it is linear, so that it's going, let's say, for 2 or 4 counts, an even distribution of changes in dynamics, either louder or softer? Or is it going to be more exponential, where you stay lower for longer, and then at the very end, all of a sudden you get much louder or much softer? So these are all things that you would have to clean if you're working on dynamics, as opposed to playing something at a 2-height system where everything is either high or low. So it is much, much, much more difficult to clean up crescendos, decrescendos, linear, curvilinear approaches to dynamic changes, etc. So kudos to everyone who is performing in Civitas, but also like the instructors and whatnot who are working with that. That was bold, I guess is one way to say that. It was a difficult choice, but they executed it very well. So GG's to everybody who is a part of that organization. Can you use Bluebird drums with my teachings? I mean, you can use any drums with any of the teachings. It's just a matter of just practicing. So you can practice without sticks. Like, you can practice like that. You can practice with sticks. You can practice on any kind of pad you want. You can practice on expensive drums, cheap drums, all sorts of stuff. What matters is just getting your hands going and whatnot. Especially if you're just starting off. Only when you get to like the more like advanced playing and maybe even intermediate does it really matter like what kind of sticks and pads and things you're playing on. But for beginners in particular, you can play on anything and you'll get better over time. Let's see here. Did I talk about everything on the dynamic changes? Yes. Let me check that. Ooh, okay. So this is another really interesting side of drumming that I don't really hear people talking about much. Okay, so rubato is where you temporarily and intentionally speed up or slow down a little bit for some expressive effect. So for example, a phrase might start and end at the same tempo, but you might speed up or slow down slightly within that macro phase. For example, if it's like a 4-bar phrase or something, you might be at 120, the starting and ending, but you might go down to like 115 and then maybe up to like 130 or something, kind of in between there, just for a little bit of time to make it so that you are kind of fluctuating with the time intentionally. And you can also do the same thing with dynamics as well. So if you think of like dynamic levels as skyscrapers, we have like different levels like pianissimo, piano, mezzo forte, forte, fortissimo, etc. Within the skyscraper, each level has a floor and a ceiling within that particular dynamic range. So the floor being one dynamic level lower, and then the ceiling being one dynamic level higher. So you're able to kind of float in between them. So let's say you're playing something at 6 inches. If you're playing at 6, you can go down to the lower dynamic level of 3. You can also go up to the higher dynamic level of like 9 inches and everything in between while kind of like maintaining the center at 6. So that is the level that you're playing on. So one of the things that you can think about when you're practicing is it as like storytelling. Music that you're making is no longer with words, but is with the music that you are performing. So you could emphasize some parts of the musical phrase more than others. And you can do that with some dynamic changes. You can also do that with some tempo changes. And those are just 2 of the many different ways that you can make music with this. Now, this is much easier to do, the rubato with tempo and rubato with dynamics, when you are playing as a solo instrument, like on a solo snare drum. But if you're on a snare line with like 7 other people who are all performing, that is much harder to do dynamic changes, rubato, so like tempo changes, etc. Which is why most of the snare lines and drum lines that you will see, they will play at 2 heights, they will play at consistent dynamics or a consistent speed that is not going to fluctuate in any way. However, that doesn't mean that's the only way that you can or should play, especially if you're playing some concert repertoire. Highly encourage you to experiment with changes in the speed and the dynamics at the micro and macro phrasing level. So think of the full phrase of whatever it is you're working on and trying to make it as musical as possible by changing some different aspects of it. Hey, you're in Ghana. Nice. I played a piece that was... who was it? I think it was Schmidt or Smadbeck. I forget. Composer. But they wrote it based off of a trip that they went to in Ghana. What was it called? It was Ghana, I think. It was a marimba piece, and it was like the pattern. It was really beautiful. I forget the name of it. I'm pretty sure it's Ghana, but it was a marimba piece that I played a long time ago, like 20 years ago. Wow, I'm old. But welcome. Thanks for stopping in. Okay, so that was Rubato for tempo and dynamics. You forgot what BPM means? It means beats per minute. So if you're doing 60 BPM, then that means you're playing like 1 beat per second, and that was just a random tempo. That's not 60. So if you're doing 120 beats a minute, that means you're playing 2 beats per second when doing that. So whatever speed you set your metronome at, it's how many beats per minute that you're doing that. Oh, yeah. Okay. So here's another thing that's not often talked about enough with concert snare in particular. So concert snare buzz speeds are determined by the dynamics and the tuning of the drum. So it's not just like a predetermined check pattern, like I'm always going to play 16th notes and like... That might sound good depending on the dynamics and the tuning, but it also might sound terrible. So if you're playing a 16th note check, like a 16th note leading into a buzz roll, you might actually do like a triplet if you're playing quietly. I'm going to emphasize the subdivision in it. So if you're playing quieter, you might have a smaller subdivision than what you're actually playing the check leading into it. But if you're playing louder, like 16th notes, and you play buzzes on that as 16th notes, it might not be enough buzzes in that space and time for that dynamic level. So what you might need to do is actually play faster subdivision for your hands. So I'm going to crush it so you can kind of hear it. So you might play like 6 tuplets if you're playing extra loud. So, etc. So that's something to consider when you're playing like a concert snare buzz roll, is that if it's too slow, it will have like decrescendos in the sound, where you kind of get that pulse in there. And if it's too fast, it can sound too compressed, like too many notes fit into that limited amount of space, or it might even have a pulse to it. So playing quietly might require a slower check than playing fast, which might have a faster check pattern for the underlying subdivisions that you'll play with your hands when doing this. Now, another thing to consider is that the number of strokes per hand that you're using can either make it sound even or make it sound unintentionally pulsed. So, for example, if you're playing with one hand that has more than another, you'll get a pulse, like an egg beater. So, where you're doing 3 in one hand and then 2 in the other hand. So, if your hands are even with your playing, so that you're just playing constant, like this, where one hand's got more and the other's got less, and you're playing a consistent check going back and forth between the hands, it's going to sound pulsed when doing that. So what you want to do is match it so that your right hand has the same number of pulses as your left hand whenever you are working on your buzzes. So you want to have it be a nice even pulse. So it might be 3 notes per hand or 4 notes or whatever it is that you're going for when you're working on your buzzes. I personally work on 3 strokes for my concert snare because of the tuning of the drum and the way that the guts vibrate with it. It's able to mask the fact that I'm playing 3s, so it doesn't sound as rhythmic as if I was playing it on this drum pad compared to on an actual concert snare, like a piccolo snare or something. Now, another thing to focus on when you're working on this is that the way that you play is going to have a natural decay if you're doing a bounce stroke with your buzz rolls. So when you're playing this, you're going 1, 2, 3. Your first note is going to be louder than your last note. Or if you're doing 4 strokes or even 5 in one hand, the first versus the second one, the last one, is going to be completely different in terms of its volume. So one of the things that we do is you can actually compensate for this by playing in the softer part of the drum, like i.e. towards the edge, on your loudest note, and playing towards the center of the drum, which is the loudest part of your drum, on the softest notes when you're playing this. So if you have a natural decay when you're playing, so we have 1, 2, 3, we're just getting loud to soft. I'll play the loudest note in a softer part of the drum, just a little bit off the center, and the softest note in the loudest part. So there's a slight sweep, maybe about a couple of inches. You're not going like from the edge all the way to here, so you're not going... This is not like a tenor sweep or anything like this, but you're going like this. A slight sweep in there to make it so that you have an even sound. as opposed to like a pulse, and I'm extra exaggerating here with this. So that's the goal with having that little sweep in there. So if you see somebody playing with a slight sweep in their concert buzz roll, and they're doing it intentionally, that's the rationale behind it. But if it's like somebody who's brand new to playing and they're just kind of like going like this, try to get the sound in there, maybe you want to work with them on that, to work on that. Now, another thing to consider when you're working on buzzes are accents on buzzes. So when you're working on a buzz stroke, there's a lot of different things to consider with like the initial attack. So for example, if you're playing like a loud buzz, you might actually start off with singles right into a buzz. So that way you have like this very loud attack as opposed to like an emphasis, like something like this. But it depends on what you're going for. Like a forte piano, you could play it as a single stroke where you're playing an accent into a buzz. You might also do an accent that is a buzz stroke on one hand. You might also do an accent that is two accents without the rim shot. Something like that. Or you might even do like some singles into a very low sounding buzz. So there's many ways that you can play like a forte piano buzz on here. But there's also many ways that you can play accents on there. For example, you could do an accent where you're playing like a low taps and you're going to actually play just a tap or a buzz. It just kind of depends on how articulated you want it to be. Now, there are some ways that you can actually practice this with some play-alongs. So let me pull that up so you can see it. Good morning, Tyler. You like 4-note buzzes for concert and 7 for marching? I like 3. 3, 3, 3. Where is it at? Oh, up here. Okay, so under the grid variations, there's over 1,000 of these variations linked at the top of the screen. But underneath the buzzes, you can do triplet or 16th note. So let's say you're working on like a 16th note check pattern. What you could actually do is work on buzzes so that all of the notes are buzzed. Or you can work on it so that it's buzzes on taps. And there's different kind of like accent patterns in here. So there's buzzes on taps, and then there's buzzes right here, either forward or backwards. And so when you click on this exercise, when you go into the timestamps in the description, you can jump to whatever BPM you want. Like let's say you want to work this up at like 102 beats a minute. It'll count you off. And for some reason, the quality is very low right now. So let's fix that. But when you're doing this one, this is a variation on working on buzzes where you are articulating the accent as opposed to putting a buzz on it. And this permutates the accent, so it's all on the first partial, all on the second partial, all on the third partial, and then all on the fourth partial, and you 4-2-1 that. So you do 2 counts of each, and then 1 count of each, etc. So this is a great way that you can work on your concert buzzes, even though this is a grid variation, which is typically used more in like rudimental context. So highly recommend checking out the buzz on taps or the buzzes for 16th note, but then there's also the same variations for triplets if you go right into this particular playlist. Cool. Tyler, I talked about Civitas at the very start of the stream. I watched the show. GG's, by the way. Let's see. Oh, okay. So another thing to consider. When you're working on buzzes, it's also very important, especially with like concert snare, to put the strainer, the little lever that you turn on and off the buzzes, in front of you. So that way you always know where it's at, so you can quickly turn it on and turn it off. When you start playing, turn it on beforehand. When you stop playing, turn it off, so that way it doesn't vibrate when like the brass strings or winds or whatever actually starts playing certain pitches. It will make it so that your guts, the snares, will vibrate. So turn it off when you're not using it, but have it in front of you. And then when you're working on dynamics and you're moving, so you're playing on louder and softer, move straight forward and back to where you were in the center. So that way you are staying over the guts. So if the snare guts are right in front of you with the strainer right here, and you're moving there and then moving back, you'll get a snare sound the entire time. As opposed to if you are having your snares over to the side and you move forward, over here, you're not going to get the snares to activate as well as if you were actually playing right over the guts. Now, with the marching snare drums, this is a little bit different because the marching snare drums, you can't really like rotate your drum to make it so that the guts are in front of you. The guts are on the side, the strainer that is. So turning on and off is on the side, and so you might be at like a diagonal angle, maybe like this. So when you're playing on a marching snare, Gravity still works, don't worry. I was getting concerned there. So when you're playing on a marching snare, when you're moving with a buzz, or like anything really, I guess, but you're actually going to move at a diagonal angle if you want to still activate the snares. So if the snares are at an angle like this, instead of moving straight forward when you're playing towards the edge, you'd move at an angle so you still hear the snare sound when you're doing this. Otherwise, you'll just hear like almost like a very high-pitched tom sound, as opposed to hearing the snare guts vibrate on the bottom. So this is something that I'll see like some beginner snare lines they'll do is they'll just move straight forward, straight back, and they're not actually getting the snare sounds. So make sure you're intentional with whether or not you want the snares to activate while playing on the edge or not while doing it. Nicoletta, hello from Italy. Welcome. Let's see. Get a ballad piece and symphonic band. It's kind of funny. That's funny. I personally, when I was back when I used to play in like symphonies and stuff, I would do use piccolo sticks. So instead of using sticks that had like a normal bead, this is obviously a marching stick, but like I don't have any concert snares near me. I'd go with a really tiny piccolo stick. Because I had the marching chops, I could get the volume I needed out of the small bead and be able to like really make that snare drum sound nice and loud, but it allowed me to play super quiet when working on it. I had a guy, this was actually during high school. I think it was for either regional or all-state or something, but he was a guest conductor, and we were playing a piece, and he like stops the whole band, and he's like, "You on snare drum, play that like complicated snare part." And it was at like pianissimo. It was like super, super quiet. And so like I played it. The guy's like, "You're the first person that I've had to not correct on this." He would have people actually play with pennies in their hands because it was such a quiet part. But because I was using the piccolo sticks and I actually have like wrist control as opposed to like fingering all the strokes in, I was able to play super quiet because I was just wristing it. Even though it was like a complicated rhythm part, so it was like a good compliment. But I was like, am I getting called out here? I thought I played it okay. And thankfully I did. Yas, piccolo. It's the way to go. Let's see here. Oh yeah. So this actually was inspired by a question that I saw on Reddit. So one of the things that you might need to consider when you're playing when you're teaching a drum line, I often see some people think that like traditional grip means that you're an advanced snare line and match grip means that you're like a beginner snare line. But a question that you should ask yourself if you are teaching a group is, do you want to teach a bunch of snare drummers or do you want to teach a bunch of percussionists? And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to that, but it just depends on like where you want them to be able to be after they graduate from the line that you're working on. So do you want them to continue to march just on snare and only play snare, or possibly even play traditional on the drum kit? Or do you want them to be able to play other instruments like timpani or marimba or whatever, where you're using a more versatile grip in terms of match grip? So with traditional grip, you're kind of limited on playing on a marching snare, on a drum that's on a sling, or on drum kit at most. But it's not necessarily like a technique that is better than match grip. So Thomas Lang, who's a very famous drummer, drum kit, is phenomenal. And the way that he phrased it is, if traditional grip was better than match grip, then why not play double traditional? Why doesn't anybody do this? And it totally makes sense. And as somebody who marched in high school, college, and DCI with traditional grip, like I only play match grip now. It's just it's so limiting to play with this technique. Even though it might look cool or might feel interesting, it's just not as versatile as playing on match grip. Now, if you are a percussion instructor who is switching a line over from traditional grip over to match grip, if you march snare specifically with traditional and you make that decision to switch over, then you can get away with it. As long as you have the street cred and the chops to like be able to back up the decision and say, well, educationally, I think it's more valuable for you to learn match grip as opposed to traditional grip. If you are, however, like a tenor player or a marimba player or whatever, and you are the one who's making that decision for your snare line, odds are they are going to think that you just don't know what you're talking about, or that you are not as good as like the other instructors who are teaching traditional grip. That's no knock against you or anything, your abilities, blah, 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 blah. But it's just what I've seen for some students. They will assume that the instructor doesn't know what they're talking about if the snare line is switching from traditional over to match grip. So just be prepared for that. What I do recommend doing is sharing some drum lines like Vanguard 2005. Like if you look up the lot clips from their finals, like their snares are all playing match grip 2005 again. Or anything from like Dartmouth or some other WGI groups that are like high school groups that are playing match grip and are just like consistently throwing down and scoring very high every year. If you can share clips of that to show like, look, this world-class group that is consistently performing at the world-class level is playing match grip and has played match grip for years, that can be one of the ways to be able to convince the group to go, oh, maybe it's not like a beginner technique using match grip on snare drum. Maybe it's actually a valuable thing to learn. Now, another thing to do is to think beyond the label of like a snare drummer. So the groups that I worked with, whenever we switched over from traditional to match grip, they mostly bought into it because they were percussionists rather than snare drummers. There was one year where we actually had the snare line swap with the tenor line, so that the snares played tenors for a movement and the tenors played snares and vice versa. So that gave them way more versatility to be able to play multiple instruments, literally, during a movement for marching band. But we also had, for many different years, the battery would actually go into the front ensemble, into the pit, and they would play four mallets during the ballad. Because some of the pieces that we worked on, like, it just didn't make sense to have like a big like ballady drum part. So instead, like, the snare line would go in and play some four mallet stuff. And often the strongest marimba players were in the battery. They were marching in the battery, but they were really good at playing like marimba and other things because, again, we were preparing people to be percussionists and not just drummers. So in the spring, we also didn't have a WGI line. Instead, what we had was a variety of percussion ensembles that were both instructor-led by myself and some of the other instructors, or student-led. So the students would meet on their own time, and they would sometimes compose or arrange their own music and work on that on their own. And then we'd perform that in our own separate concert just for percussionists, where it was pieces that the students created or pieces that were like pre-composed by other composers that we worked on and then performed. So it's a great way to get students to be able to learn a variety of instruments. And as somebody who has played like every band and orchestra instrument for my undergrad, I had to learn all of them. And then a variety of percussion instruments throughout the many years that I did concert percussion. I am a better performer because of the fact that I played all these different instruments. I can find similarities with the techniques that can transfer over from one instrument to another. So, for example, yesterday when I was playing drum kit, I talked about a Julie Spencer technique where instead of moving your arm like a tenor player, where you'd keep it so that you're playing the same angle of the drum, for mallets, you can actually rotate and do a flick where you are playing like this. And if you do that on drum kit, it makes it so that your arm's not having to move as much when you're doing a very fast back and forth between the hi-hat and the ride. And so that's a valid technique that you can use that I wouldn't have known about if I didn't practice mallets. So there's a lot of like really beneficial things that you can learn with it. Here's another example of this. So with four mallets, Lee Howard Stevens talks about how when you're doing chord changes and whatnot, that you should strike so that when you move, you immediately go to the next position and you hover over it so you can get a perfectly vertical downstroke while working on this. So that can also apply over into tenor drums. So if you're doing like a crossover, you don't want to go at a glancing angle when working on your tenors. When doing like a crossover, you want to ideally be able to move so that you're moving straight down into the crossover. So to do that, when you hit, you want to move as quickly as possible so you can get a downward strike as opposed to a glancing strike, which is going to give you a weaker sound quality and potentially even like hit the rim and move over into other stuff. So learning multiple different instruments makes you better at whatever your primary instrument is. In my case, my primary instrument is snare drum, but I became a better snare drummer by working on marimba, vibraphone, timpani, all sorts of other things that have informed the way I approach the snare drum, which is my primary instrument. Brendan, good morning. What am I doing? Oh, you think it's awesome what I'm doing. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's see. Sorry. Tyler, I see that you commented. Yeah, so Tyler, I hear you. There are a lot of I was one of those people. So like I learned concert rep and like marimba and stuff because I had to get into the undergrad that I was working on. Um and even though like it worked out, like my college was paid for because of the like marimba playing and like timpani and concert snare, etc. But all I really wanted to do was march snare. And I think like it's okay to have a space for that, for you to like focus on a primary instrument like snare drum, but it is so valuable to learn all the other different instruments. It's like if you're going to like learn like MMA, well, if you're going to learn, let's say like Muay Thai, which is like a striking system that uses like elbows, knees, etc. It's also beneficial to learn a different type of striking martial arts because it can inform like the approaches that you use with the one that you're doing. So it's the same thing for like drumming. It's similar for like other instruments. Like being able to learn how to become more musical with your phrasing on like a flute can inform how you then approach the snare drum and vice versa. Like it's hard to sell though sometimes when people are so stuck on like a one instrument approach where they're just like, no, this is all I want to do. But as somebody who like decided to go the teaching route, like as a career for percussion, I have had some students who wanted to like go and teach, and the way that I'd phrase it to them is, okay, are you only going to teach snare drum, or do you think you're ever going to get in front of the tenor line or the front ensemble? Or do you not want to ever become the caption head? Do you only want to be the snare tech the entire time? Like, prepare yourself for that really long-term success. Like, I was able to jump into a caption head role immediately because I knew all of the instruments and was willing to, like, learn more of them. Like, I was just kind of okay on tenors, and still kind of am. But, like, I learned how to play them backwards and whatnot, so that way, while the tenors were playing, I could play the same parts of them in front of them and be able to help them out. So I didn't just stand in front of the snare line the entire time, even though that was like my passion and the thing that I was interested in. So that might be one way to like sell it to them, is if you want to like teach, you want to be able to like potentially make more income by like being the caption head or working with other students privately, as opposed to just snare drum students. But another way is just like framing it as like you become a better snare drummer by learning other instruments. And like you as a tenor player, I'm assuming you learned more than just the tenors, and that has informed the way that you're playing. Like what I mentioned at the start of the stream with Civitas is the level of musicality in the group was absurd. Like the amount of dynamic contrast in, like there was even like some parts with some rubato that was going on, like in the snare soloist. I think is towards the middle of the show, but like the ability to do that, it shows the level of musicianship of the members of the line. Like if all you did was like march snare the entire time and then you were on that snare line, that would have been very difficult. But if you march snare and you played concert rep and you like played timpani and marimba, the show makes more sense. And the book that you all had to perform was very difficult because of that level of musicality that was kind of required to actually perform that. How to read music notation. If you use the play-alongs on my website, that will help. But the timing exercises will help you. Just go slow with those. Those can help you to like figure out what to do. Like, what does this rhythm sound like? And then it'll actually like play it, and you can hear it. So, let me hold up as an example. So if you're on here, like in the marching bass stuff, you can go to like eighth note timing stuff, and when you click on this, there's a bunch of different timing exercises, and you can just find one and then pick a tempo, counts it off, and you can hear what are these different rhythms. And so this is obviously for the eighth notes only, but then there's also, again, just scroll down either in the limb independence or in the marching bass section, whatever you want to do for this. There's also, triplets, 16th notes, and then, timing transitions from like one rhythm to another. So like, as an example, eighth notes into 16th notes. And so this exercise, again, you go into the timestamps, you pick whatever BPM you want, and this will help you be able to practice whatever the rhythm is that you're going into. And some of them are really wacky, like 5-lits and whatnot, into like 7-lits. but quintuplets into septuplets, but there's a lot of easier ones in here as well. I'm glad it came through and was demonstrated. Yeah, I'm not... Again, I've told you this before, but I don't give false praise, but that was a very hard book, like deceptively very difficult, and the execution of it was great. Like I talked about it at the beginning of the stream, but it is so much easier to clean basically a 2-height system as opposed to something that's constantly changing. Because when you're working on dynamics, like, is the dynamic going to be linear? Like, are you going to go from here to here in an even distribution of dynamics from point A to point B? Or is it going to be like curvilinear, where it's going to be like exponential at the end? But then also, one of the things that I mentioned is like when you're doing a roll and it crescendos, are you doing a ladder approach where it's like 2 notes at the same height, 2 notes at the next height higher, 2 notes at the next height higher? Or you can do an approach where it's like 3 inches, 4.5 inches, 6 inches, 7.5 inches, like 9 inches, 10, like, is each note going to have its own different dynamic? Like, there's so many things to clean with that, and then also has a decrescendo. So kudos to everybody involved with that. Like, that was a lot harder than I think younger players would understand. Sage, hello. I missed another comment. You glad that you switched from snare to quads? Yes. And especially if you approach quads from a snare drum perspective, no offense to tenor players, but there's a tendency, like when playing, like, as soon as you go from the vertical where it's like, and then you start playing horizontal, all of a sudden, like you get tenor players where their taps are like at 9 and their accents are all over the place as soon as they start moving around on the drums. So if you can approach the tenor drums from a snare drum perspective and just keep everything nice and low, and you happen to be like doing crossovers, like, then that's just like the chef's kiss. The ultimate tenor player is born when you do a fusion dance with a snare line. Okay, let me go back there. What was the next topic? Quad taps. Yeah, I make fun of them all the time, but I mean it with love. Let's see. Okay, so this is a very important one. So let me take a look at my notes here. Again, I wanted to come prepared. Since I had a headache, I was like, I'm not gonna drum, but I can still provide some value, I think. Maybe. Okay. So how do you improve as a drummer if you don't have an instructor nearby? So for example, if you're working in a more rural part of this, like you're at a rural school and you want to be able to learn from a really good drumline instructor, but you don't have any in your area, what do you do in that scenario? So one of the things that you can do is you can reach out to people on social media to schedule a remote lesson. So you could do something over Zoom or Skype or whatever. And just another way that you can actually do that is you can actually record yourself and send a tape of your playing to somebody, and then they can give you like a tape feedback or written feedback. It's actually something that I did with Glenn Crosby for a couple of years. This was before, like way back in my day, before like Zoom was a thing, is I would like on a physical tape record myself and then mail that to him, and then he'd send back like a bunch of advice of like things to work on. So like that's something that you can do, but it's so much easier now, and you can just like reach out to people on social media, just DM them and be like, hey, do you teach lessons? Often they'll have in their bio that they do teach lessons, and they'll include a link to their website. So check that out as an option for being able to study with some really cool people. Another thing that I actually did is when the band days, like the local band days at the university, they would invite in like a guest instructor, like Paul Rennick or Jeff Queen, are a couple of examples that came to mind. When they were in town for those band days, I would actually reach out to them and be like, hey, can I get like a 2-hour private lesson with you and study with them that way? So you can actually do in-person lesson with somebody who is just visiting your local area. Even though it's not as like consistent as like a Zoom lesson or things like that, it's better than nothing. I learned so much from the couple hours that I spent with Paul Rennick or the couple hours that I spent with Jeff Queen that like really heavily informed my own playing. So you can do that too for in-person lessons. And just as an FYI, I no longer teach privately, so this is not me like promoting my private lessons. I'd rather focus on teaching like a larger population with like free content rather than like only teaching those who can afford lessons. But a lot of your favorite content creators out there offer private lessons or even courses if that is something that is of interest to you. And again, I don't sell courses. I don't teach privately, so I'm not promoting that for myself. If you cannot afford private lessons, which they can be very expensive, there are tons of free content out there. So for example, I have literally thousands of exercises that can help you and drumming tips. So, it's not here. At the link at the top of the screen, it's got 62 chop exercises here. We've got over 1,000 grid variations that you can work on. We've got a bunch of limb independent stuff, over 460 march and bass exercises, a bunch of cadences, over 360 technique exercises. So all these exercises can like help your drumming. So for example, if you want to improve your endurance and speed, check out that playlist. If you want to work on your timing, check out that playlist. Like there's a ton of content in here in terms of exercises to work on. But I've also got over a dozen hours of like drumming tips. So in this particular playlist, when you click on it, there's a ton of videos in here that show that have like a bunch of different questions that I've answered in all the different live streams that I've done. So this is stuff that I've paid a lot of money to learn over the decades that I've been drumming, and you can get access to it for free. Even the members first stuff, this is like all scheduled to release. Like this one comes out on Friday, so like it's not behind a paywall or anything. It's just early access if you want it. So go to the tips and lessons section if you want some free content, like how to develop limb independence on a drum kit or how to hold traditional grip. Like these are things that I have learned over the decades. Been drumming since 1998. And then even like during school, like getting my bachelor's, master's, PhD, etc., learned a ton of things in here that I share for free, so you don't have to pay for them. Tell you some tips on drums? I mean, go here. There's over a dozen hours. It'll keep you busy all day, like quite literally, if you check that out. Actually, Tyler, so your comment about video feedback is leading into something that I'm about to talk about. Let me review my notes real quick. Now, another thing that you can also do is I've had some people who will tag me on social media and will specifically request some feedback. So if you go to like the drumming tips playlist inside of here, if we scroll all the way down to this one, as an example, somebody asked me to provide feedback on themselves playing through Flamus. And you can do this anonymously. You don't have to show your face or anything like this. And so I spent a good amount of time, edited down as just under 15 minutes, providing feedback on like, here's what to work on for your left hand technique. Like, here's some things to consider for that. Here's something to work on for your right hand technique. Here's some things to work on for improving your flam taps. So this is something that I can do. And it's kind of like getting a private lesson without actually having to pay for anything and without it actually being a private lesson. Again, I want to be able to share free content for the masses, for anyone in the world. And so this allows me to give you individual feedback while also still helping out more people this way. So if you like tag me like at Jared O'Leary on YouTube, it should pop up in my mentions and I should be able to take a look at it. Just make sure you like write in the description or in the comments or something that you give permission for me to talk about this on stream and to be able to give you some feedback. And then I will edit it down and I'll put it inside of the drumming tips playlist right here. So that way like more people can learn from similar mistakes or things that you're doing really well, so it can help their own playing. So that's another thing that you can check out. Now, another thing that you can do is you can also learn to teach yourself how to get better. So you can watch the tips that I provide in the playlist, and then you can use a mirror to refine your playing. However, what's even better than using a mirror is to actually record yourself. So one of the problems with practicing in front of a mirror is, let's say you're working on your flam taps. My stick flew in the air and like landed on the button that says start and tune. That's hilarious. So like if you're practicing flam taps, you might be working on like trying to lower your heights when working on it. So you might be going, okay, my flam taps are here, and you're in front of a mirror trying to lower it to get it to sound better. But the problem with working on flam taps or whatever, flam accents, why do I keep saying flam taps? I'm distracted by the fact that I dropped my stick. Gravity, it still works. I'm glad I can keep you entertained, Tyler. So if you're working on flam taps, your flam taps are too high. The problem with practicing in front of a mirror is that you will often be split with your attention. The attention dedicated to trying to play good, and then the attention where you're analyzing and playing in front of the mirror. And that can make it very difficult to actually try and improve. So if you record yourself, you can focus 100% of your attention on your playing, and then you can focus 100% of your attention on the analysis when you go back and review the recording. So for example, you can record yourself and then listen to yourself without actually seeing it. So just like cover your eyes and listen to what it sounds like. And you should listen for a rhythm and not a sticking. So when you're practicing and you're playing paradiddles, do you hear, or do you just hear straight 16th notes the entire time? Like, do you hear that emphasis that was on the right hand? Or like a roll. Do you hear a roll that sounds like this? Or do you hear something that sounds like that? Very different. If you are not looking at yourself and you're just listening to it and analyzing it, you can specifically listen for those consistencies with the rhythms and making it sound rhythmic rather than like a sticking. Another thing you can do is you can put it on mute and then look for consistencies in your heights. So what you're trying to do with these like different like approaches of how you can listen to it is you're trying to isolate out your senses to focus on one thing at a time and really hone in on it. So for the first one, it was like focusing on the listening, listen for that rhythm. For the next one, when you're muting it, you're actually focusing on the heights. So are my accents consistently at one height, and are my taps consistently at another height? Or are they switching depending on like what's going on? Are my velocity between my right hand and my left hand the same? Does my left hand move slower than my right hand? These are all things that you can really notice when you put it on mute and you just watch it. Another thing that you can do is you can actually put it on slow motion. So for example, on YouTube, you can click on the gear and then you can click for the speed to make it go as slow as like a quarter speed or even super fast. If you go super slow, you're able to look at the mechanics of your hand to figure out what exactly is going on when I'm playing like a fast thing. And if I'm playing like really fast flam accents, does it look the same fast, like when I'm working on it fast and I slow it down on using the gear? Does it look the same as if I'm practicing it at like 40 beats a minute, etc.? So ideally, your technique between repping it slow and playing it fast but watching it in slow motion should be the same. It shouldn't be drastically different. But if you also practice something and play it in front of a camera, if you speed up your recording of yourself, you can actually see some of the mistakes that you might be making. Like you might be moving your hips a bunch, or you might be moving your shoulders when you're like moving around on the tenors. And you might not notice that if you're like doing just like these subtle movements at normal speed. But then when you watch it at like 2 times speed and you start noticing yourself jiggling like this, then you can really notice like some of those macro motions that might be going on that could be causing some issues with your own playing. But another thing that I would highly recommend doing is when you're actually recording yourself going through something is to record yourself playing something with multiple reps. Don't just play it one time and analyze that playing. Play it at least 2 times and listen back to it. What is consistent between the first rep and the second rep, and what is inconsistent between the first rep and the second rep. The way that you approach those different airs is going to be different. So a consistent air is something that you might want to focus on because it's like, oh, well, my accents are consistently too high or my taps are consistently too high. Okay, well, let's focus on lowering those taps. That's a consistent air. And the inconsistent airs might just be a brain fart. You might be thinking about, oh, I'm hungry, or, oh, I can't wait to hang out with my significant other later on today. And your brain is just distracted, and so that is causing the air, and you might not need to actually work on that inconsistent air. Those are some tips to work on with that. What size are my drumsticks? So since you're on YouTube, if you actually go into the description of any one of the YouTube videos, here, I'll show you. So for example,
how do I get my...
Wow, that's loud. Right underneath the stream right now, there's 2 links. One takes you to the exercises, but the next link where it says /gear, and then it's got percussion, this actually shows you the sticks that I'm using, as well as some books that I recommend. So if we go here, these are some books that I recommend. If you just keep scrolling down a little bit, here's the stuff that I use on drum kit. Here's the pads I'm using. And then the drumsticks that I'm using for all of these streams are the Hardeman hammers. So these are like Hardeman sticks. So the same style of design, but they're significantly heavier than normal Hardemans. So these are about 44% heavier. I measured it on stream one day. And they're great for working on chops. So that's why I always use them, because I want to just keep my chops flowing. But these are the sticks that I use. So on drum kit is the Jack D. Jeanette. On concert snare, it's the Bolero tips. For the chop building stuff, I use the Hardeman hammers. For normal performing, I use the Hardemans. And then for tenors, I use the Hardeman multi-stick. I like the barrel tip, but there's a variety of sticks that I have used in the past. Like the ones on top are Scott Johnson's. The ones underneath that are the Tom Floats, signed by Tom Float. So I've used a variety of sticks, and I have like a whole like barrel full of sticks over there basically that I've tried out, and I just personally like the Hardemans. So to each their own though. How to tune your toms. There's a lot of instructional videos on how to do that. I can't show you how to do that on here today because I'm using, you can't really see it, the mesh heads. So the mesh heads are very different than like a normal set of heads. They're these heads. They're great for not annoying everybody around you because they're specifically designed for low volume. They're called the silent stroke heads, and then the low volume cymbals as well. So I can't really show you how to do the tuning on them. How do you get better on the doubles? So I've actually got a whole video that shows you that. So if you go to the link right here, or if you go into my home tab of YouTube, apparently it's going slow. But on the home tab, if you click, this is where it can expand. If you want to stay on YouTube and don't go to the website, that's fine. It's just not as organized as neatly as I'd like because YouTube's limited. But the very first playlist right here, the drumming tips, if you click on here, there's a video on here that's number 83, Thorough Approach for Learning and Refining Your Diddles. This is what I'd recommend for it. So that it talks about a variety of different exercises that you can, whoa. What the? Sorry. A variety of exercises that you can use. And so this is like a several minute response, over 5 minutes of talking about how to work on your diddles. So it gives you a variety of exercises to work on and a thorough approach for it. So to get your diddles from sounding like, to like actually be nice and even and threes, fours, whatever. Like there's a variety of stuff. I haven't drummed it all today. There's a variety of exercises in here that I talk about. So that's what I'd recommend is check out that video, number 83, A Thorough Approach for Learning and Refining Your Diddles. And then all the resources that are demonstrated in that are in the very first link. And if you specifically go down to the technique stuff, focus on these exercises to help you out. You've been considering making video essay on why there's so much negative stigma around match grip? Would you allow me to cite some of my works on YouTube? Yeah, of course. Please do. Yeah, so the drumline subreddit like recently had a question of somebody asking like, should I learn traditional grip poorly or should I continue to play match grip better? I guess is like one way to summarize it. And I was actually surprised at how everybody was basically like, yeah, don't learn traditional, focus on match grip. I thought there would have been more pushback. And I say that because there's so many groups out there that don't play match grip, like at the world-class level and whatnot. Like you just don't see people playing match anymore. Like 05 Vanguard is the last snare line that I can think of that really did it. Outside of the scholastic competitive world, like Dartmouth, etc. So I'm surprised there's like not more people trying it. But, you know, to each their own. The Toka Kickbox, have I had any experience with those? No, what's that? So I'm going to go ahead and remove your comment. You did have a serious question earlier, but if you're going to troll me, I am very quick to wield the band hammer and have absolutely zero patience because life is too short to dealing with trolls. Considering I get those daily, I will very gladly make it so you can never answer or ask a question ever again. Drumline subreddit tends to have more educators as of late. Yeah, but like, so do the top WGI and DCI groups. Like, are they just afraid that their snare line wouldn't sound good? And wouldn't be able to compete? Like, because having done some research on skill acquisition and expertise, like, when I switched from traditional grip over to match grip, like it's still, I'm refining it. Like my left hand does not sound as like good as my right hand still, and that's after a lot of time working on it. So what I'm wondering out loud is like, are the instructors who see the value in match grip just afraid of, well, we're going to sound bad for a year or two? And then that kind of gets into the philosophy of, well, are you there for the score? Or are you there for the educational value? And for myself, like I made it very clear that I didn't care about the scores. Like I literally didn't go to award ceremonies and stuff, because I don't care. Like what score you get is irrelevant. And I know that's an extreme take on it. And some of the students thought that it was like, it showed that I didn't care about like how they did. But what I cared about was like how they felt they did leading up to that performance and actually in the performance itself, rather than like what some judge arbitrarily gave them for a score. But that's kind of my own rant that I could elaborate on forever. You're not a fan of a cajon? Yeah, so a cajon with like a pedal is like fun. Like we have a really beautiful cajon over there that my wife got. But yeah, that sounds interesting. Like the problem with gigging is if you have a large kit, like I have a small like jazz setup with this kit. This one's actually my wife's kit, but my kit is set up the same way. Got rid of the extra tom and like some extra cymbals and stuff. So like a smaller kit is way easier for gigging with. So that sounds cool. Like I knew a guy who had a literal suitcase. Like he made a custom travel kit. You know those like roller suitcases, and so he had that became his bass drum, and then inside of that he had a snare with like a couple of cymbals. And so he could like literally just roll on the stage, just pull out a couple of things and just play some simple stuff. I think there's so much value in being able to play on a minimalist kit that for whatever reason, we've kind of got this like maximalist approach to drumming where it's like, well, if I have 50 toms, that's better than 3 toms, right? It means that I'm a better drummer. Like, no. Like, how about you just sound good on a snare, a hi-hat, a bass drum, and maybe a ride? If you can do that and sound great, then that is way harder to do than let me play with a bunch of different textures and timbres, etc. So yeah, I mean, if it makes your gigging easier, then cool, go for it. Another thing you can do is like experiment with different types of sticks. I don't think I have it on this kit. No, I have it on the other one. But there's like I think they're called roots. So they're like sticks that have like rods like kind of taped together basically. And so that gives it like a little bit of a clicking sound when you're doing it. So that could be like another way that you could play quieter, like in small acoustic gigs. But it's a fun acoustic challenge to like find some sounds. Yeah. So the Dom Moyo, he's the drum set professor at ASU. So I studied with him, and he would like challenge students to just like play on, all right, we're not going to use like anything other than a snare drum, and you trade 4s on the snare drum. And he would like do some sweeping sounds and scraping sounds and hit on the different sides. Like it's a fun thing to challenge yourself with. Like if you're like practice trading 4s either with somebody else or even just by yourself, and just experiment with getting as many different textures as you can out of the drums. Like you can't really do that with these like the mesh heads as much. But if you have a kit that has like the full timbre effects, because the meshes sound a little different, experiment with getting as many different sounds out of one instrument as you possibly can. Highly recommend it. It's a just like a very worthwhile thing to do. Even with like concert percussion, there's a lot of stuff that we would do for like multi-percussion pieces or even like solos like on vibraphone, where you would like bow the instrument or like bow even like a gong or like a cymbal, and you'd get these like really ethereal, crazy sounds. Just have fun, kind of like taking a Foley approach, where you just kind of see what unique things you can do. Like, what if I combine A with B? What do we get? And just enjoy that side of it. Foley is also a cool thing that you can do. like there's some percussion ensembles that I knew that would like play music to like cartoons. So they'd have like a screen behind them that would be like a Tom and Jerry cartoon or something, and they would not only play like some ragtime music to accompany it, but they'd also play all the different sound effects to it. And I experimented with that. I was an instructor at a community college, and we had some of the percussionists become digital percussionists, and so they used a launch pad, which is like a MIDI trigger, and they would trigger stuff in Ableton Live, which is a digital audio workstation, a DAW, and so they would basically make live digital percussion to augment the music of the ensemble. So we had like a Star Wars song where they'd have like a TIE fighter fly over and like have the laser shooting sounds. We had a piece, a programmatic piece that I think it was the Vietnam War that it replicated. So we had artillery sounds that were like period specific to that war and had that going on. We had a rain one where it's supposed to sound like a thunderstorm. Like there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do even with the digital percussion. It was super neat. Anyways, what was the next thing I want to talk about? Okay, so there's that. Ooh, okay, so still got time? Okay, cool. So, okay, I've got a couple more things that I prepared. 3 more. Let's do this. All right, so what are double stops and why should you use them to get better at drumming? So it's a string term that has been used by drummers. So the string players, when they would play on 2 strings at once, they'd call it a double stop. And we have borrowed that idea to say playing with 2 hands at the same time. So playing something in isolation can prevent like a direct comparison. So for example, if you're playing what your right hand does when doing a flam accent, and then you do that off your left, it might sound fine isolating out just the right, isolating out just the left, but you don't have that direct comparison of being able to see, well, what do my hands look like? You're kind of having to go off of memory, which again makes it so that you are not only having to focus on playing, but you're also having to split your attention so you're focusing on the analysis at the same time, which can create an issue. You also can't necessarily hear the audio changes, comparisons between your right hand and your left hand. So again, you're having to go with memory. A double stop allows you to actually practice listening in with yourself. So in order to match both the velocity or touch of your hands playing together. So when you're doing like the flam accent pattern, instead of playing it on just the right hand, play it as a double stop. So that way you can see, does my right hand and left hand match the heights? Or is it like where like the left hand is super high, or am I playing with like a different velocity so that like the right hand and the left hand are playing at a different speed when doing this? So if you hear a cha sound or a flam sound, then that is not ideal. What you want is a popping sound, the little pop, 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 when the plosive sound you get when you do both hands at the same time, and that's for both the accents and for the taps. So I highly recommend working on double stops. Now, there are some exercises that I have that specifically allow you to work on double stops. So this is in the technique section. There's a playlist that says double stops right here. And when you click on this, it's got a variety of different exercises that are specifically designed to work on your double stops. So for example, some of the ones that recently came out were the fulcrum control exercises. So this is a great way to work on your spacing in your taps, as well as like the spacing physically in your hand, the changes that you make from playing an accent into some interior notes with some taps. You can play this all on the right hand, you can play this on the left hand, but ideally you'd play through this exercise as double stops so you can hear whether or not your taps sound like flams or they get that popping sound in there. So again, this particular playlist, the double stop variation, has 41 different exercises in here. And all these members' first ones are just early access, so you'll get access to them for free. But you can find it linked at the top of the screen. You can just scroll all the way down to the technique section, and it's inside of this particular playlist, as well as over 360 other technique stuff. Double step practicing methods are goated. Agreed! Totally agree. Let's see. Okay, so this might be relevant for quite a few different people. It was certainly relevant for myself. So how do you get back into drumming after you've taken some kind of a break? So as somebody who has taken a break for, like when I was working on my doctorate, I was not playing drums nearly as much as I wanted to because I was having to focus on research. So having gone from like practicing all day every day to not practicing at all for an extended period of time and then coming back to it, I felt like I had taken a huge step back and wasn't sure if I'd be able to, quite frankly, just like get back to where I was previously. If you acknowledge that you're going to slowly need to improve, you can use any of these exercises that are on my website. Like you can start off with the chop exercises, and let's say you want to like relearn Blue Devil's 99 chopping spree. Instead of like playing at your maximum tempo, which may have been like 160 previously or something, just go slow. There's no shame in it. Slow it all the way down to like 40 if you need to, using the timestamps in the description, and just focus on refining your technique and slowly getting your hands remembering things again. Now, you will be much further back than you were before the break that you took. In general, what I'd probably say is like, see, how do I want to phrase this? Why did it pull that screen away? Oh, that's weird. So when I pull up my note, it like makes it go black. Huh. That's weird. Anyways, so when you are trying to regain your abilities as a percussionist, it's not going to take you nearly as long. Let's say it took you like 5 years to be able to play like Blue Devil's 99 chopping spree at like 160. It's not going to take you 5 years again to get it back up to that speed. It might only take you about 10% of the time to actually get back to where you were. So if you just start slow with any of these exercises, whether it's chop stuff or grid variations or techniques, exercises or whatever, start slow and just let it gradually speed up. You will get your hands back into the routine, just like relearning how to ride a bike again. And it will make it so you don't blow out your chops or burn out your chops by trying to play as fast as you used to do it. So think of it as kind of, I'm going to get back into this thing that I love doing by focusing on the technique, but by going slow and gradually getting back into it. If you jump straight into playing fast, you could hurt yourself. So another thing that I recommend is to actually do a stretch and massage routine. And if you scroll all the way down to the tips and lessons section, I have this video that's called This Hand Routine Saved My Drumming, and it has a very specific stretch and massage routine that I use that I highly recommend you also take a look at. Yeah, so it looks like Streamlabs blocked your comment because it was a bunch of emojis or something. So, interesting. I didn't even know Streamlabs had editing or moderating abilities. Weird. Okay. Let's see here. Oh. Let me review this real quick. Okay, so this is the last thing that I want to kind of mention. I see this so often with like young drummers in particular. So if you want to make a drum line, stop focusing on learning the DCI and WGI drum breaks. Like, I don't know if you need to hear this, but like if you look at these like chop exercises, these are fun to play, but there's a reason why there's only 62 of them compared to like the 1,000 grid variations and then the 363 technique exercises that are currently here, is because technique and grid variations, which is another way to work on your technique, is way more important for making a line than working on the chop stuff. So yeah, it's fun to like learn a snare break from your favorite drum corps, but when you show up at an audition, what they care about is how consistently you can play these exercises, the technique exercises, as opposed to how fast you can play these chop exercises. So if we reframe like a Bruce Lee quote that is often used to, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 rudiments at once, but I fear the man who has practiced one rudiment 10,000 times. Focus on refining in the consistency and the basic stuff. So, for example, Boston has a rudiment sheet that a lot of people like to pass around as, oh, learn all of these. But if you look at it, like a lot of these rudiments on here are a bit of overkill. Oh, let me make it so you can actually see it. Boop. And right there. So for example, Boston has this rudiment sheet that a lot of people will use. And while some of these are fun to play and interesting, most of these you want to actually play when you're marching in a drum line. Like, you're likely not going to play many egg beaters. I only learned it when I was like learning some very specific snare breaks and whatnot. But in general, I've never actually had to play an egg beater for any of the drum lines that I've ever marched on. Or same thing with a lot of these other ones that are on here, like some 4-strokes and whatnot. While Boston might have it in some of their stuff, most drum lines aren't going to play this. Instead of focusing on all of these and some of the wackier ones, like some people literally have books with thousands of different weird rudiments with some names that I will not repeat, focus on the basics. So what do I mean by that? So if you go into the technique section right here, there's a playlist called the Rudiment Builders. The Rudiment Builders has some fundamental things to like work on. Like if you want to work on your paradiddles, check out this one, or your paradiddles, check out this one. But if you want to work on your flam drags, your cheeses, your flam fives, these builder versions right here are a great way to work on those 3 rudiments. Now, why am I recommending those 3 rudiments in particular? Those 3 will give you the biggest bang for your buck for the hybrid rudiments. So if you go into the grid section, which has over 1,000 grid variations, I actually only recommend focusing on a few, small handful of these. Focus on diddle on 1, both triplet and 16th note, flam on 1, cheese on 1, flam drag on 1, and flam 5 on 1. If you can do those 5 rudiments, both triplet and 16th note, with just the rudiment on 1, that will set you apart from all the people who are sitting there focusing on, well, I'm going to play RCC's Maury Spree at like 140 beats a minute, etc. So what I highly recommend is focusing on those rudiments and ignoring all the wacky stuff. So when you click on these like grid variations on here, there's a bunch of them in here. Like for just cheese, there's 33 different variations in here. Just do these first couple. Cheese on 1, and then cheese on 1 with backwards accents, etc. Hershey's, I don't know why you're asking for permission. What is Zalgo? I actually have no idea. But Streamlabs is apparently banning too many emojis. I don't even know what that is, but I've got like the moderation settings set on high, so that way I don't get the spam and the harassment and whatnot. That's a funny way of phrasing that. You got much better drumming when you cut the crap and learn hard exercises? You're a beginner musician. Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So when you're working on like drum kit, there's like a lot of books like that will come with like CDs, and even websites now that have it, where it's a track that's like drumless, and I forget the name of it. I have a couple that are specifically designed for that. What I'd highly recommend doing is experimenting. So try and figure out what works for you as like an immediate, I know this will sound really good. Like if it's a rock song, play a rock beat. Like, but then expand beyond that. So like, well, what if I played it with like a samba pattern on a rock song? Or what if I did this with like a trap beat? Or what if I did this swung? Like there's many different styles that you can play with it, and try and come up with like a theme and variation, and that will make you more of a versatile player than like I can play one beat one way for one song. Another thing that you can do that I used to do when I was writing books for drum lines is I would get inspiration from what have other people already done with this song before. So like Verdi's Requiem, the Dies Irae, there's a lot of people who have done that. And so I listened to other marching band arrangements, other drumline arrangements to see like what were they doing? What do I like? What do I not like? But then also listen outside of that. Like listen to like Steve Gadd play a completely different Latin jazz song and then apply that into what you were doing and try that out. If you take the theme being the drumless track, and then you have the variation, which is you just making up different stuff and playing in different styles, I think that's way better than just like learning one song one way, if that makes sense. Especially because it's for your own practicing. It's better to be more versatile and responsive and reactive to the musicians you're working with than to be stuck in your own ways. Some of my favorite like things about like prog rock in particular is they have an ability to just jump, to bounce in and out of different styles. Like Dream Theater, Liquid Tension Experiment are like really good at like all of a sudden it'll go from like heavy metal prog rock into like a little Latin flair into like something completely different, and it just keeps jumping back and forth. Even like System of Down is pretty good at doing that too. So that's kind of like a long-winded answer to that. You love trying to make music in a halftime or double time? Ooh, Tyler, that's a great idea. Yeah, so Rabbit, that's an excellent thing to experiment with. Dom Moyo, who I studied with, he would constantly change the feel of things. So it'd still be in like 4/4, but all of a sudden he'd like take the quarter note triplet and make that into like a 4/4 beat over a 4/4. And then he'd still land on 4 bars later while playing a meter on top of a meter that was like augmented by playing it as like a quarter note triplet. Like if you like get wacky stuff like that, then that just like can really set you apart. And it's a groovy challenge that is so hard to do. But if you one way that you can like practice doing stuff like this is like, okay, I'm gonna do like a 4-bar phrase and just put this on loop, and then just try experimenting with it so that I'm gonna do it a Latin jazz style, and then I'm going to do it like a rock style, like for the next 4 bars, and just keep going back and forth between that. That can help you out. Change your perspective on the topic. Good. I mean, I am just trying to share things that I've learned from other people who are better than I, and things that I've like learned myself and experimented with. But music is often presented as like a very black and white, right or wrong, and I'm not a fan of that. So like I had a marimba student who was studying with me privately, and she wanted to get into Berkeley to study with Nancy Zeltzman. And so she was playing one of Zeltzman's pieces, and we were working on it, and she's like, I really like the way this is written, but I want to change it so that there's more rubato here and flip the dynamics this way. And I was like, musically, that sounds great, but you're literally going to perform this for the person who composed this. So if you perform it this way for them, you need to have a very sound musical response to why you chose to do it different than it was intended. And if you're able to defend that, then I can't argue to say you have to play it one specific way. Often music is like presented as black and white, like you have to do it one way. But you can fluctuate from the intent of the composer if there's a musical reason for doing that. If you want to change the story, the narrative, essentially, in my opinion, it's okay to do that. And the like plot twist, or the spoiler, I guess, for the end of that story is she performed it for Zeltzman and got on a scholarship and made it into Berkeley. So like obviously it worked out okay in that particular scenario. But I will say that there are some composers who do get offended by that. But I think it's important to understand that there are many ways to express oneself if we think of music as like storytelling through sound. Highly recommend that. He used to get in trouble in basketball band doing that. That's funny. I forget his name. There's a guy who does that on YouTube on Drum Kit, where he like just completely changes the style, or like plays like the 4/4 over like another 4/4 phrase, messing with things. You'd be honored. I would be too, and I have been. What is interesting though is like some people are like very dogmatic, like you do not change the composer's intent, which it's a different style, it's a different approach, and I'm more on the one end of the extreme, which is like make it your own, just have a reason for it why, and if you can defend that, then in my opinion, the composer shouldn't argue against that, because there's many ways to interpret a story. Like even like a lot of these instructional things that I'll say, like, so like here's how you hold a drumstick, and people will interpret it completely differently than I intended it, and I just have to accept that that's how language works. And it's the same thing for music as well. So like music is just constantly interpreted in many different ways. A song that might be happy for some is sad for others, and etc. How the music speaks to you as a musician is individual. Okay, so Filet, you're trying to make me sound racist with your question, so I'm just gonna go ahead and ban you for that. So there's people who will like come in here and like pose like a innocuous question, but when you actually read through and combine the words together, then it makes you say a racist slur. And I have zero tolerance for that kind of nonsense. So enjoy your ban, but good try. You bigot. There's no need for that. Anyways, I rambled a bunch. I actually went way over what I thought I was going to do for today's stream. If you want to find any of these play-alongs, you can stay on YouTube. So on YouTube, we've got all of the drumming content on my home tab. If you click on the header here, this is how it expands. So that way you can see all of the playlists that are inside of here. And there's a bunch of them. And because there's a bunch of them and it's not organized as neatly as I would like to, just go to the top of any one of the descriptions of these videos, like this one, which starts talking about touch. And the very first link takes you to here. So on my website, jaredoleary.com/drum, which is linked there if you're on the vertical, we've got the chop exercises. So there's 62 of them right here. And then we've got over 1,000 grid variations right here. Again, focus on diddles, flams, cheeses, flam drags, and flam fives on one if you want to be able to make the drum line. There's a bunch of limb independent stuff, which I'll work on tomorrow. So here's how you can develop limb independence if that is of interest to you. There's over 460 marching bass related stuff, like a ton of timing exercises. There's a bunch of cadences, the full scores. There's over 360 technique exercises. And then there's all the drumming tips, all the live streams, all the books and gear I recommend, and then some scripted lessons, blah, 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 blah. But hopefully that keeps you busy for a long time. There's enough that you could play 8 hours a day and it'd take you a whole year to get through all of it. So that should keep you busy for a while. But if not, there's like just under 500 scheduled to release. So if you see a video that says members first, that just means it's early access. So don't worry, it's coming out for free. But you're welcome, Tyler. Check out the beginning of the stream if you rewind back, where I talk about Civitas. I'll add in timestamps here in a moment. And then probably in about 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, because it'll take a while to add in the timestamps, I will do Portal 2. We're going to beat that game today, since we're like halfway through it. But I appreciate everybody stopping by. I appreciate the people who are not trying to be racist trolls. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. If you enjoy this content, just share it with somebody else. But